So I've been asked to keep this as relevant as possible, and I'm going to begin by telling you how to deactivate a nuclear bomb. In fact, I'm going to twist that a little bit. How to deactivate a nuclear bomb with a sex toy. So this is a true story. I was in a top-secret lab. I cannot tell you which country or where it was, and they were deactivating the nuclear weapons for this country. Now, part of deactivating nuclear weapons is getting rid of the plutonium. Plutonium-239, that is the fissile isotope. Fissile means that when the bomb goes off, that atom explodes, it releases neutrons, the neutrons hit other atoms, those explode and release neutrons, and so on and so on. You get that chain reaction that destroys a city. And that plutonium is very, very dangerous, so you need to break it down. Part of the steps you do to break that down is you agitate your samples, you shake your samples. But of course, you're doing this with incredibly radioactive material. So you've got to have lead bricks to protect you. And you can't have a single drop, not even a microgram of plutonium escaping. So you've got to reach over there, and you've got to do it very delicately, and you've got to have something that's really easy to clean. And there is no such lab equipment in the world that is designed to do that. So this team needed something that was easy to maneuver, wipe clean, and could vibrate at a certain RPM. So they went down into town, into the sex shop, slid their money across the table and said, please, can I have a vibrator? They brought it back. They set up a test rig. It worked perfectly. Fantastic. But it broke. Now, this is a big problem because I don't know if you've ever tried to requisition something from a government before. Getting one vibrator, hard. Two, not going to happen. So someone had to go back into town, back into the red light district, back into the shop, and say, I'm really sorry, but after 6 hours of continuous use, my vibrator is broken. Please, can I have another one? I'm telling you this story for two reasons. The first is that it's better to make love than war. The second is the power of telling you a story. Because if you look back through that story, there's actually a lot of science in there. I've been telling you about plutonium-239. I told you how fissile isotopes worked. I told you actually how to deactivate a nuclear bomb and the process involved. And I talked to you a little bit about practicalities. But that was all embedded in a story that I promise none of you are ever going to forget. And that is why I love traveling around finding these stories. I am a bit of a science adventurer. I've now been to 87 countries. In a week, I will be heading over to Kyrgyzstan, and then to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan as well. And I venture around the world. I've been down the Amazon. I sailed down the Amazon. Incredible experience. Pink dolphins in the Amazon. Never knew that. Henry Ford has an abandoned city in the middle of the Amazon called Fordlandia. I've been inside the world's fastest supercomputer. I was at the time anyway. It's in Oak Ridge in California. Very difficult place to get into. Size of 4 basketball courts. I've been to Karnak, and I've been inside the tombs of the Valley of the Kings. My current book that I'm doing research for at the moment is on the history of chemistry. Chemistry, of course, comes from alchemy. Alchemia, from Egypt. That is where that word comes from. So I was looking at the origins of chemistry. And I've been down into the cenotes of Mexico. This is in Yucatan, diving into the literal Mayan underworld. So I like to explore, I like to find out new things, I like to find strange facts and interesting things that I can share with an audience. But the power of a story goes much further than that. Let me give you an example. In 2009, cervical screening in the UK increased by 400,000 women. Now, techniques hadn't changed, the science hadn't changed, the importance of cervical screening hadn't changed. What had changed was the story. This lady is Jade Goody, and for those who don't know, she was a reality TV star. She was on Big Brother, and she was diagnosed at a very young age with cervical cancer. She died aged 27. Her story resonated with people. It reminded them of the importance of cervical screening, and they went to get screened. And we know that actually was the impact. We've done research on it, and we can demonstrate that that was the effect, the Jade Goody effect. So we know that stories can be incredibly powerful. How can you use that in your world? Well, my recommendation is always to go back to the first story that you heard verbally. What did it begin with? Once upon a time. Don't talk about the science. Talk about yourself. Talk about the story. Talk about how you got there. Now, when it comes to science, you can always dive into the strange. Science is weird. Science is bonkers. These are three of my favorite stories. I'm going to run through them very, very quickly. I'm actually going to go right to left. So the guy on the right there, that's Hennig Brand. You might have seen that photo. Sorry, not photo. Painting. Very, very famous painting. This is the discovery of phosphorus by the alchemist. He sees that it's a glowing vial. But the story is actually missing from that. Hennig Brand was a little bit of a strange guy. He was convinced that he could turn his own urine into gold. And he bottled several thousand liters of his own urine. He actually started marrying wealthy widows and was bankrolling himself on their money. As soon as they ran out of money, he would divorce them, marry another one, because he was convinced that he could turn his urine into gold. And one time, distilling his own urine, he actually found that it was glowing in the dark, and of course he had discovered phosphorus. That is how we got the first modern element on the periodic table, before the periodic table existed in the 17th century. In the middle there, we have Mithridates. Now, Mithridates was the king of Pontus, and he came up with a brilliant wheeze to try and stop people from killing him. He thought he was going to start taking tiny amounts of poison and slowly increase them over time so that he became immune to poisoning. It's a brilliant idea. You might have heard it from The Princess Bride, the iocane powder bit where they beat the Sicilian. Now, Mithridates, it's actually called Mithridatism to try and do this, and it can absolutely work. He became immune to poison. The problem, as Herodotus tells us, is that when the armies of Rome, this is around the time of Julius Caesar, came and conquered Pontus, it was Pompey Magnus sweeping in there, he tried to kill himself by drinking poison, and it didn't work. Again, think about what you've just learned there. You've learned a little bit about science, but it's all embedded in the story. The final one of my favorite stories, this is Andre Geim. Andre, interesting guy. He used to do Friday night experiments. He would do anything that sort of struck him as interesting. And one day he decided to see what happens with diamagnetism. Now, diamagnetism is a really interesting property. It's where something goes the opposite way of being drawn to a magnet. It actually goes away. And water is slightly diamagnetic. It's because of the weird shape of the molecule of water. If you think about H2O, you've got your hydrogen, you've got your oxygen in the middle there. It looks like Mickey Mouse ears. And because of that diamagnetic effect, if you have a really powerful magnet, you can get water to float in the middle of it and levitate. And Andre thought, well, what's lighter than water? Frogs. So if I put a frog in a drop of water, and then I put it in the middle of a magnet, can I get the frog to levitate? He absolutely could. He won the Ig Nobel Prize for it in 2000, making frogs levitate. But that natural curiosity spurred him on. He kept doing his Friday night experiments. And one day he decided to look at pencils. Now, I'm sure many of you have tried this at home. If you've ever got a pencil when you were a kid and you just rubbed it on a piece of paper and you tried to get that patty nice and smooth and you smoothed it with your finger, he took a piece of sellotape, ripped off that patty, and looked at it under the microscope. And he was looking at graphite from a pencil that was incredibly thin, so thin that it was actually 1 atom thin. He was looking at a 2D material, a 2D sheet of chicken wire made of carbon. And of course, you can bend chicken wire and you can shape it, but you can't punch through it. It's incredibly strong. The material he discovered was called graphene. And graphene is going to change our world in the same way that plastics changed the Victorian world. We cannot imagine the things that will be made from graphene very, very shortly. So he became the first person to win the Ig Nobel Prize and the actual Nobel Prize because of his curiosity. It's an amazing story. Think about that story. Think about the journey. That's a key part when we're actually talking about ourselves. How do we get from there to here? Now, let me tell you something about my own journey into science. And this was something I didn't even realize was a journey at the time. 30 years ago this month, this man died. This was Ayrton Senna, and I was a huge Formula One fan. I actually liked Nigel Mansell and absolutely hated Ayrton Senna. I thought he was the baddie. But I remember very clearly, very vividly, the crash. and Ayrton Senna was killed at San Marino Grand Prix. And it was the moment that took me from being a kid to an adult, I think. It was the first real tragedy that I became aware of. I actually understood, I paused, I thought about, I actually began to process. Now, fast forward 30 years, and I'm writing a book on the technologies of Formula One. I'm looking at all the spin-offs. How do I explain some of the really interesting spin-off technologies that come out of Formula One? Well, it's all about persona and people, coming back to that personal story. And I started thinking about that moment with Ayrton Senna. What kind of connection does that have? And talking with scientists, I found a very clear one. So when Ayrton Senna died, we don't actually have the black box footage from that crash. We don't know what happened in the cockpit when he died, because at the time, you had to broadcast to a helicopter, and then that helicopter would transmit it to the TV center. And so you had to pick which feed you were taking from the car. And you couldn't do a direct broadcast because of the interference. There's a lot of metal on the track, there's a lot of crowds, there's all kinds of stuff going on. There's obviously moving cars going at very, very fast speeds. But that's a real problem, because investigating crashes, understanding how those crashes occur and being able to analyze them is critical in improving safety. So people started looking at ways to get around this. One of the few patents that Formula One actually holds is how to transmit. So now we can transmit continuously. Data streaming from cars in Formula One is incredible. They can download gigabytes just passing through the pit lane. There's loads of cameras on there. There's loads of different sensors as well, over 100 in a Formula One car. But the cameras, obviously, we do have direct car transmission. You can go and see the driver's view. You can see what's going on. And, of course, for black box footage, analyzing crashes, such as Romain Grosjean's crash. You probably remember that in 2020. Horrific fireball burst out. 27 seconds it took him to get out of the car because of all the preparation and preparedness they had to get him out, because they understood how to save lives. That all came following this crash. And that technology can be used to save other lives as well. Because the technology that you need to communicate through metal, through continually moving parts, through all that chaos, is exactly what we need for driverless cars. So driverless car technology and the safety standards that we'll be implementing in driverless cars when they start to emerge, and they're already on our roads, but they will continue to be so, comes from that tragedy. Now, of course, as a very, very tiny kid, I was not involved in any way in the Ayrton Senna incident. But that story connects to me. That story resonates with me as a person, as a human. It captured my interest, it captured my attention, and it brought me to that technology. And so when you're thinking about technology and thinking about your stories, you don't necessarily just have to think about you. You can think about the wider scope as well. We are all interconnected as people. And storytelling in that way, framing our stories to actually consider it a shared collective vision, is really, really important. Now, I'll leave you with one major tip I have in terms of how to share stories, particularly when it comes to science. If you look at popular science documentaries, usually they're physics documentaries or biology documentaries. Now, Brian Cox is fantastic. David Attenborough, amazing, incredible. Neil deGrasse Tyson, wonderful. Name a chemist. A little bit more difficult. And the reason is that chemistry doesn't capture that wonder, that sense of awe that we're all looking for. You can do that with physics. You can look at the planets, for instance. You can do that with biology, because creatures are incredible. And we, of course, are creatures. So how do you get around that if you can't get that sense of wonder? If you can't share that sense of wonder you've got? Make it human. Find something that unites and connects with your audience and resonates with them in that way. If you can do that, your passion will shine through, your excitement. And if you can tell an amusing story, people will never forget how you have deactivated your own nuclear bomb with your own sex toy. Thank you very much for listening.
First of all, thank you so much, and thank you for those very entertaining and now memorable stories. One thing that You know, this whole idea around, just around the concept of communication, around storytelling, around narrative, that we've talked obviously today about science, but in the realm of politics, you know, I would argue people like Farage or Trump, or basically in some ways what probably many people in the room would consider to be the black hats, if you will, of the politics world. They seem to be masterful at storytelling.
Absolutely.
And as such are able to draw, you know, arguably outsized attention and ultimately votes and power because of it, sort of thing. And I'm wondering if in the world of science and technology, we see similar things where in some ways those are not necessarily corrupt, but certainly commercially minded, are effectively doing the better storytelling, even though perhaps the science and the claims behind them are less solid, let's say. Is that something that you're seeing?
Absolutely. And it's one of those interesting things is that you see people try to win arguments with facts. And facts are essential. Facts are vital. Facts are sacred, as The Guardian puts it. They're really, really important. But if you look at people and how they actually succeed with storytelling, there is a reason that we call those politicians popularists. It's because they tap into that popular consensus. They actually start telling stories on a human level. They relate it to experience. They relate it to something that you can see. And by relating your story in that way, they're incredibly canny. They're very, very clever at it. What we need to do is start to recognize that we can start telling stories with facts. We can actually embed those facts into our storytelling. And by doing that, the facts will win out because we understand truth when we hear it. There is that resonance to it. And so if you can start competing with that and add in more facts into your storytelling, but have that storytelling there, you're going to succeed, and we're hopefully going to get rid of that disinformation because we are in an age of disinformation.
Yeah, but I guess the point is that true facts, if you will, versus compelling story. Compelling story is going to win many times, maybe most of the times.
I would say that compelling story will win out over facts several times. And it's a danger, because that's how we're starting to see the resurgence of things like the Flat Earth movement.
Yeah.
Now, the Flat Earth movement, the moment you try and look at anything they're doing, you can debunk it very, very quickly, regardless of the angle you're taking. But they capture that storytelling. They tell a story, they tell a narrative. Look at how they present things online. It's very, very canny. Yeah. And so one of the battles that we have with misinformation is educating people about how science can be communicated. How it's about having your facts. Absolutely, you need to have that fact, you need to have that underpinning. But by bringing storytelling in there, you can actually make sure that you're getting through. You're cutting through the noise.
Brilliant. Kit, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure.